Working for you. A weekly talk radio program which highlights developments of national interest and the activities of your St. Kitts Nevis government. Join host Roy Williams as he presents news, views, reports, and interviews about everything regarding the activities of the Team Unity government and the building of our communities and the development of St. Kitts Nevis. Tune in and call in to interact with your government and share your views regarding the upward forward development of your community and our beautiful Twin Island Federation. Working for You is weekly, every Wednesday live from 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m. on ZIZ Radio, Win FM, and Sugar City FM with rebroadcast on participating stations. Working for You.
Good afternoon and welcome to Working for You. I am Roy Williams. We are very happy to be back for 2020. Of course, 2020, is means a lot of things. It's perfect vision and so on, and we ask for vision for all of us in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, good vision, so that we can see the things all around us that are so good. 2020 vision. I want to wish all of you a happy new year from Working for You, from the staff of SKNIS and myself. Today we are going to be discussing the role of the Parliament, the role of the Speaker, and all that pertains basically to the Parliament, or what we call our National Assembly. So I thank you very much for tuning in to today's program so that we can be enlightened in terms of our Parliament and our Constitution. Today I have with me the Speaker of our National Assembly, the Honorable Anthony Michael Perkins. Sometimes we don't hear the A, but the A is actually for Anthony. Am I correct? Absolutely. Anthony Michael Perkins. We normally refer to him as Speaker Perkins or Honorable Speaker Michael Perkins. Thank you very much, sir, for coming on today's program. It is quite an honor to have you on our first program for the year. But has this been your first time on this program as well?
Well, first of all, Roy, let me thank you for having me here. I just learned a few minutes ago that this was in fact the first program for the year. So indeed, it's an honor and privilege for me to be here. Mm-hmm. As to your question, if I've been here before, yes, on
you
one
were
other
here
occasion,
before,
yes,
right?
I've been here before. Thank
Good.
You.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Great. So, of course, our National Assembly or our Parliament has a very prominent place in terms of our society and its governance, the governance of the country and so on. It is where laws are made. The Parliament is where laws are made, and of course, in terms of governance and so on, we have three arms of government. You have the legislative, which has to do with the Parliament. You have the judiciary, which has to do with our courts and the prison system and the law and all of the law enforcement and all of that. And then, of course, we have the executive, basically, which is the governing, the government of the day. The executive, which is led by the Prime Minister. And, of course, you have his cabinet ministers. Now, you are Speaker of the National Assembly. What is your role as the Speaker of the National Assembly?
Well, thank you again, Roy. And before I get into answering your question, I think I should take the opportunity to wish all our listeners a very healthy and prosperous 2020. And as to the question as to the role of the Speaker, maybe I should speak first of the establishment of the Parliament. Our Parliament is established by way of the Constitution. The Constitution of 1983 sets out the composition of our Parliament. And in Part 4 of our Constitution, from sections 25 to 48, as a matter of fact, 25 to 50, it sets out all the areas, all the various roles and that define Parliament has oversight of. As to the establishment, it speaks of the who are members of Parliament, and very simply, we have 11 elected members. They are called representatives, 8 from St. Kitts and 3 from Nevis. And in addition to those representatives, we have the senators. They are the nominated persons, and you have 4 in number. So our Parliament is made up of 15 members, elected and nominated, and the Speaker is also a member. So it's a 16-strong membership. Then section 37 to 49 of the Constitution speaks about or speak to the powers to make laws, the how Parliament function, the procedures that we go through. And then there's another section that speaks to the summoning, prorogation and dissolution of Parliament. That speaks to when Parliament convenes, when it's dissolved, and then there's the last section which speaks about elections and the Boundaries Commission and so on. Because the point is that Parliament, the members of Parliament they gain their position through an elective process, through elections. So, like I said, you have the representatives who sit there as members, and then you have the nominated members. So the establishment of Parliament, the constituting of Parliament, it comes directly out of our Constitution. As to the direct role of the Speaker, he is known as another term for the Speaker is the presiding officer. He's the one who sits and presides over the proceedings of Parliament at any given sitting. And so he just establishes control of the proceedings to make sure that things are going in accordance with what we call the standing orders of the Parliament. And the standing orders are just a set of rules which govern how Parliament functions at any given sitting, what happens during that sitting. And basically, Parliament deals with bills, which are proposed legislation, which if passed then becomes acts. Then there are motions that Parliament deals with, and those are pretty much any proposal that a member brings. Most times it's the government that brings these motions, but members from the opposition can also bring motions, or there are proposals which are brought to Parliament, discussed, debated, and at the end of the day it's decided whether or not the motion passes. And so in a nutshell, that is the functioning of Parliament.
Right. We're one of probably the few countries that has what we call a unicameral chamber, in that we have elected representatives and appointed representatives sitting in the same chamber.
Yes.
In some places they have what you call, it's bicameral.
Yes.
You have an upper house and you have a lower house. What could be some of the, you think, could be some of the disadvantages to having a unicameral chamber as opposed to having a bicameral chamber?
Well, many times if you examine some of the other jurisdictions which have the bicameral system, is that I find that the Senate, the powers and the authority of the Senate could be, in my opinion, a bit diluted. To me, the real power lies in the members who are elected. Like in our House, if I'm to compare that to, say, the House of Commons which our Parliament came out of in
Yes.
terms of our rules and regulation. Now the House of Commons is a 600 plus strong House of Commons, and we are, like I said, we're only 15 strong. One of our rules state that anything that is silent, if there's anything happening within our Parliament that a rule does not cover, we would look towards the House of Commons for guidance. I am very, how should I say, weary of that, applying that particular rule, because you're comparing a 600 plus strong house to a 15 member strong house. But the good thing is that that same standing order says you look to it for guidance, but you never bring it into effect if it's going to place a restriction on the proceedings in our particular house. So there's a qualifying thing about that particular rule. So to answer your question specifically, I don't think in our system, I think we're fine with the unicameral system. I think
Right.
we're
Of
just
course,
fine.
you know, in
Yes.
the UK you have the House of Lords as well,
Right.
and you say that the Senate may not be as strong, but in the American system, the Senate is very powerful.
Yes, yes.
Because of course senators are elected.
Yes. But in our system,
They are appointed. What would be the
Yes.
equivalent is that they are appointed. Now, talking about senators, what does the Constitution mandate about senators in terms of the composition of the National Assembly?
Once the election has been decided and the government is in place, the Prime Minister has the opportunity or the right to nominate 3 senators. And that is why you'll find in the case of the existing situation, you have 2 senators in the persons of Senator Wendy Phipps, and you also have the Senator Akila Bayo-Nisbet. The Attorney General's position, it's like a choice. If the Attorney General is not an elected person, then the Prime Minister has the right to go outside of Parliament and nominates senators. So that's why you find the 3 on the government benches. And then on the opposition benches, the leader of the opposition has the right to nominate one person to be a senator. And in the case, it will be Senator Nigel Carty.
Right.
So that's where the 4 senators come from.
Okay, fine.
Yes.
So the Constitution can mandate at least 3 or 4.
Yes.
And
yes.
if the AG
Yes.
is not one of those
Exactly.
senators,
Exactly.
and the leader of the opposition,
Has the right- one, yes.
and
yes.
the Prime Minister 2,
2.
and the advice of the Governor General.
Yes.
And
yes.
in the other case where the AG is not right.
Right.
Okay.
I think what happens in most cases, though, is that any sitting prime minister would not make an elected person an attorney general, because like he uses up one of the elected positions, and so to gain, I guess, an additional advantage, he goes outside and
Yes.
could bring in that extra one.
Right.
That's how I see it.
Unless, but he's a member of the cabinet.
Yes, of course. Of course.
But the speaker and the deputy speaker cannot be members of the
Cannot
cabinet,
be members of cabinet, and again, that's constitutional.
and that is
Yes,
in the
that's
Constitution
constitutional, yes.
as well. Now, you have had a speaker before you. Of course, we had the Honorable Franklin Brand. Of course, who was speaker from May 2015 to June 2016. And then you were appointed speaker sometime in June 2016 up until now.
Yes.
That's when you took your chair as the president of the National Assembly. Now, earlier you were speaking about the Parliament and the powers and the constitution of our Parliament. Now, can Parliament Parliament regulates its own proceedings, but can they make rules in terms of because nothing is set in stone. Nothing is set in stone. So there's some flexibility in terms of making up the rules of the parliament. That is what I'm talking about.
Yes, as a matter of fact, on the section 44 of the Constitution, and if I may actually read that section of the Constitution, section 44. Subject to the provisions of this Constitution, the National Assembly may regulate its own procedure and may, in particular, make rules for the orderly conduct of its own proceedings. And to me, this is a very powerful bit of legislation. Well, it's a constitutional. It has constitutional authority, and so this is saying that as a parliament, we can make rules to govern the proceedings in parliament once none of the rules violate or is ultra vires to the said constitution. And so that is why you have this what we call the standing orders, which there are some 85 rules which govern the proceedings, but at any time we can add to, take away from, amend those rules. As a matter of fact, we're in the process now of doing just that through what we call the Standing Orders Review Committee. That's a committee established by Parliament, which over the past year or so has been looking at ways and means or the areas of the standing orders which we think should be amended. And sometime in the future, we hope to be able to actually table and have passed a new or an improved set of standing orders for the National Assembly. So that's the authority.
Right.
We have.
Sometimes when I'm looking at Parliament, I often hear point of order, point of order. But sometimes it seems almost like a point of disorder. But point of order. Yes. What is a point of order?
Well, is that has a simple answer, meaning when it says point of order, it is talking about these same standing orders. Remember, there's a document called the Standing Orders, which are the rules which govern the House. And so when a member writes on a point of order, he really should be indicating which of those orders, and there are 85 of them, are being, he thinks is being violated or breached. But, Mr. Williams, over time and in the past, speakers, including myself, we have used our discretion to allow, and maybe I should just speak of myself, I use my discretion to allow members to raise almost anything under the umbrella of a point of order. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a breach of the rule, but anything that I feel, okay, it needs some clarification here. Or a member could complain that you're misleading the parliament, you're saying something that is not true. And so it's all about using my discretion to allow it and to be considered to be a point of order. Having said that, I tend to deal with points of order in three basic ways. One, I may say that is not allowed, I do not allow it, or I would allow it and ask the member to either retract or modify his language, or this is also a ruling from my standpoint, or I say nothing, I'm just silent on it and we move on. So I tend to deal with points of orders in three different ways. Yes.
So part of your responsibility is that of making rulings as the speaker. Of course, some of those rulings have been challenged. I have seen rulings that you would have made where sometimes people would be put out of the National Assembly, and we've had people, let me not say people, let me use the correct term, we've had members of Parliament being put out of the Parliament for certain conduct that is deemed unparliamentary. We have also seen challenges to your ruling. You have been termed a bully.
Really?
You have been termed one-sided. Some people say that, you are not fair, and that sort of a thing. So when you make a ruling, can you just get up and make any arbitrary ruling? Or when you make a ruling, it must be based on some rule that is there, some law that is there, so that you can substantiate that ruling.
Well, yeah, it's mainly based on the rules that are laid down in the standing orders, where I would look to see what the rule says and make a decision based on that. But of course, there are times when that discretionary authority comes into play, and I have to use my discretion and make a ruling. So to me, there are two types of rulings, in my opinion. One that is strictly speaking to a particular rule, if that was being breached, and you say, remember that is being breached, or I have to use my discretion and make a judgment call based on the context or the content of what was said, because we have to understand Parliament, it's a very robust type of setting where members are on their feet speaking, and you could say anything at any time, maybe either deliberately or in error, and I might have to use my discretion and say, okay, I wanted to withdraw that word. So clearly, the standing orders are not going to have a list of words that are termed unparliamentary. So then the speaker comes into he uses his discretion and makes a decision whether or not a word is unparliamentary or not. So that's where the ruling comes in, because if I say, for example, I've dealt with a situation where members have accused other members of, I'm trying to remember the word, hypocrite. Yes, that's the word I've heard used. Mm-hmm. And there was one time I was asked whether or not to call a member a hypocrite is parliamentary. There was an objection, and I had to think about it quickly, and then I allowed it. I said, if someone feels someone is a hypocrite, a member is a hypocrite, so be it. It's harsh, and that's the nature of politics, and even in Parliament, it could be a very harsh environment. The criticism could be rough and tough, but nothing is wrong with that. Once it's not in the speaker's mind disrespectful, I allow members to call others hypocrites. I have even allowed them to call liars.
The definition of a hypocrite is one who is not true to their word,
right,
or one who acts contrary to what they say.
Or I would ask the question. What's the difference between calling one a hypocrite and say you're being hypocritical?
Right.
The semantics, in my opinion.
Right. So, it is semantics. Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of challenging your ruling, can members challenge your ruling, and on what grounds can they challenge your ruling?
That's an interesting question, and I am happy you asked it, because yes, any ruling made by the speaker can be challenged, but there's a mechanism, and the mechanism is grounded in the very same standing orders, where any member who feels that the speaker has made a decision and he has erred in that decision, he's wrong, he has misinterpreted a rule and has made a ruling based on such misinterpretation, the member can challenge it, but through what we call a substantive motion, meaning the member can communicate his dissent, his objection, his challenge to the speaker in writing, and ask that it be set down for a hearing or for it to be debated in a subsequent sitting. Right. But it is improper, it is out of order for once the speaker to have ruled on a matter to challenge it there and then.
Right. Now, in your term since 2016 as Speaker of the House, has any member at all, ever challenged your ruling through a substantive motion, as you just said?
No, it has never happened, and that's one of the interesting things I find. And when I at times hear the discourse in the public domain, that the speaker is, like you have said just now, of being criticized or being unfair or biased, things like that, which doesn't faze me, doesn't bother me, because I know I try my best to be fair, and I try my best to my rulings to be sound and grounded in the standing orders and the rules. And so I've always asked the question, well, if there's that criticism, why have I at no time ever been challenged in the proper way? Why has not a member come to the House or brought to the House this issue, a ruling, and challenge it in the proper way? Because if that is done, and coming out of the debate and the discussion, it is found that the Speaker erred, where would that leave me? All I could do thereafter is to, I guess, apologize to the House that I erred based on what was, and we move on.
Yes.
But it has never been done.
Never been done.
Never been done. No, I've never.
So there
been
has
challenged.
never been a proper challenge
Never.
to your ruling, or a legal challenge.
Never.
Let's put it that
Never.
way, to your ruling.
There's never been such.
Okay. Now the Speaker's role, of course, is to be seen as one that is impartial, in that, he's fair to both sides of the House, the opposition and the government. In New Zealand, some time ago I was reading, it was last year, the year before, that the Speaker of the House put out the Prime Minister. Do you think that if the Prime Minister is in flagrant violation of the rules of Parliament, do you have the guts to put him out?
The Prime Minister or any member, if it's a clear violation of a law or of a rule, if it's so blatant, and the Speaker requests, say, the member to withdraw, and he refuses, then it must take its natural course, where the Speaker would have to name that member, and it's upon naming the member, then he'll ask the House to suspend the particular member. So the answer to your question is yes, any member.
Right.
Any member
Now,
who-
in the Parliament, are all members equal in the Parliament? I know before we spoke about the unicameral and the bicameral. We're speaking about elected representatives and appointed representatives. Now, in the House, is there a level playing field in terms of all members of the House being on equal footing?
Yes, all members are on equal footing. All
It doesn't
members-
matter whether you're Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition, a Minister, you're on equal footing as
Yes.
a member of the Parliament.
Yes, they are on equal footing as it relates to how the rules are applied to each of them. Because, for example, there may be a slight difference in that I always say, look, the government side has, in a way, a sort of advantage, especially in terms of its dissemination of information, right? And a case in point, and because I'm trying now to draw that distinction between, yes, level footing in a general way, but there are times the government side, government members, ministers are clearly at an advantage. For if the Minister of Finance rises and states that the cost of this or the monies expended on this particular item is $1 million, and the member of the opposition challenges that, says, no, it was some other figure. As the Speaker, and I have said that, look, this is the Minister of Finance. He has articulated this particular fact to Parliament. Unless the member from the opposition can disprove that in an evidential way, provide something to show that the Minister of Finance is not correct or misled, then I have to accept the word of the minister. He has responsibility for that portfolio, in this case, finance, and or any other minister. So that's the advantage they have, but it doesn't mean that it's not a level playing field.
Right. In the first past the post
Yes.
electoral system, of course, sometimes it's not a level playing field. Because, of course, we are dealing with a majoritarian model. and that the government basically is in an advantageous position in terms of the passing of laws. Now, you earlier spoke to, because we have a very small in terms of the composition of the National Assembly, and you made some connection to, for example, in the UK, where in the House of Commons they have 600 and something members.
I think it's 650.
650 in the House of Commons. And of course, you know, oftentimes you find people who are on the government side even challenging the Prime Minister and voting against things that the Prime Minister come up with. We can only look at in recent times to Brexit and how many times his own members of his own party and government would vote against motions that he would bring forward, and that sort of a thing. That really happens in our parliament because of the size and of course because of the majoritarian model that we have. Let's face it. Recently the bringing of the bill of the office of the tenure of Prime Minister bill, that bill did not make it through the House. And the reason being is that the government needed to have 2/3 of the composition of the National Assembly voting in favor of it. That did not happen. So in that case, of course.
And it's just not, it's not 2/3 of the overall composition, it is 2/3 of the elected persons, of the representatives.
So senators would not have been
able to vote. Senators would not have been able to vote. So, and it would have required at least one elected person on the opposition bench to have supported that tenure of Prime Minister bill for it to have passed. Because you see, there are 11 elected persons, and you needed 8. 7 out of 11 is just short of 2/3. So you needed 8, 1 from the opposition side, for that to have passed. And again, that's constitutional. It's section 38 of the Constitution, which deals with anything to change the Constitution. Any alteration of the Constitution requires at least 2/3 majority vote generally, but for certain specific items, including the tenure of prime ministership, it required 2/3 of the representatives.
Okay.
Yes, so that's the difference there.
Right. Now, what is the difference between a motion and a resolution? These are terms that we hear all the time.
Yes. Let me put it like this. I used to teach maths, so I would say all resolutions are motions, but all motions are not resolutions.
Okay.
So a resolution is something very specific, and it's just a proposal that is brought to the House. It could be a resolution on pretty much anything. And so that is, it's a proposal brought to the House. A motion now is pretty much anything that a member raises and asks. A motion to adjourn the House, a motion to withdraw a bill. So a motion could be just a short question that is put and approved. Those in favor, those against. So motions are all encompassing, but the resolution now is very, very specific, and it deals more with, resolutions deal more with very weighty and very specific matters. You know, a resolution might be required. I think it's done annually to maintain the government's borrowing capacity of a certain amount of money, or to have certain debt levels. You know, but very, very specific. Resolutions speak to very specific topics or subjects or matters.
Right. No, not too long ago, we had, as I say, we are operating basically in our political system, one that is majoritarian. Not too long ago, we had a government that was led by a minority. And on top of that, we had a motion of no confidence that was filed in that government by the majority. Now, that's a very little mix. A minority government, and you have the opposition that is in majority. That's just not how it works in our parliament. And that motion of no confidence was in abeyance for 26 months, which is an anomaly anywhere in the Commonwealth, countries of the Commonwealth. Now, recently, of course, there was a bill that was brought before the House to ensure that something like that never happens again. What is your take on that in terms of the importance of that bill to good governance? And how would you have dealt with, if you were Speaker then, how would you have dealt with that motion of no confidence? Would you have simply been a puppet? How would you have dealt with it? Because I asked the question before in terms of if the Prime Minister is in flagrant violation of the rules of the House, would you put him out?
No.
Because at the end of the day, remember, on top of all of this, we are saying that the Speaker must be presiding in a seat of impartiality.
Yes, well, Mr. Williams, the truth of the matter is this. If we look back at that issue of the motion of no confidence back then, which stood in abeyance for 26 months, and you asked me the question, if I was in the position, what would I have done? Let me go forward and come back. Meaning, the bill that was debated recently, whereby that very issue as to how long a motion of no confidence should be brought to the House, that was dealt with. And so now that act now specifies the time frame in which any motion of no confidence in the government must be brought before the House. And I should know the exact number, but I think it's within 30 days.
Yes.
Subject to correction. But once a motion...
I think 21
or
days.
21 days.
21 days.
Yes. So once that motion of no confidence is submitted to the Speaker, and the Speaker finds that it is in good order, now it has to be heard within 21 days. That's now the law of the land.
Before, remember that there was no time frame in the Constitution. The reasons why this amendment. But before, it was said that it must be heard expeditiously or as a matter of urgency.
Yes.
And of course, that was one of the arguments that what is urgency, what was being expeditious, and all this sort of a thing, and then the back and forth with the court and all of this sort of a thing and all of that, and at the end of the day, it was never heard.
Well, I believe you alluded to why it was never heard when you stated earlier that, okay, if you have a situation where you have a government of the day is in the minority with 5 elected members, you have a majority, 6 elected members now bringing forward a motion. Well, the likely outcome of that motion was that the 6 would...
Because we have a majority,
and then the government would fall. So unless we want to be dishonest with ourselves, or like, I can't find another way of putting it, to me that was the reason why the motion of no confidence was not heard some years ago. I have to be honest with myself and frank, as to why I feel, let me put it this, why I feel the motion was not heard. Because it would have passed. The vote of no confidence in the government back then would have passed. And under the Constitution, what would have happened next?
So it was a case of being, we used to use that word pusillanimous.
I'm not familiar with that word, so.
Fearful that, of course, the government would fall. But at the very same time, principia non homines, principles and not men. So therefore, if that is the case, so be it. And you go back to the people for a fresh mandate. But But sometimes it underscores the point that sometimes principles are not at play. Principles are not at play. Now, we definitely are on the eve of another case in the Parliament of the past, where we had one speaker, of course, the Honourable the Honourable Curtis Martin. And they're trying to put through the House the realignment of the boundaries very close to the election. We all know how that happened and what happened in the Parliament, and so on. How would you have dealt with that matter? Because that did not seem like a case to me of impartiality with respect to the Speaker. And the machinations that were at play in the Parliament on January 16th. I think many people were turned off. Many people, citizens on the whole, were turned off by what they saw becoming like a comedy of errors.
Well, my response to that and what happened back then, January of 2015, one of my biggest issues with what happened back then was the reason that was used to table the particular bill to have the boundaries changed, and it was considered to be an emergency. I'm sorry, as Speaker now, and understanding that only the Speaker can determine whether a sitting falls in the category of the emergency, I cannot fathom what made that an emergency. And so I would always question that. So I think that pretty much was the root of, or formed part of the basis of the problem, because if the term emergency was not used, then there would not have been the legal requirement to have the sit-in, or the legal requirement would not have been met in terms of time to give notice and so on. For any sit-in to take place, you must give at least 7 days notice, and then, but for an emergency, if you as Speaker consider something to be an emergency, sit-in, you could do what was done then. Give 5 minutes notice or whatever time was given. So I just didn't see the emergency to change.
Well, I heard the Honourable Vance Amory, and that was a question that he asked repeatedly. I could still hear him. What is the emergency? He kept asking that question over and over again. What is the emergency? And I don't think that was satisfactorily answered.
Let me put it in context in terms of what's considered an emergency. Let me draw say, an example. Under our Constitution, when the House is dissolved, it means it's dissolved. The House, having been dissolved, can be called back into session, if there is an emergency. If something happens between the dissolving of the House and the holding of an election, the House can come back into session. If there is an emergency, if something happens within the country that demands an emergency sitting, if you need to pass some emergency law, or you need to give the still government of the day some authority to do something, yes. So you understand the nature of what emergency should.
But
really
in that
entail.
case, it was not an emergency.
No, you can't have an emergency.
An emergency to push boundary changes or the realignment of boundaries through the House.
Not in my opinion. That was not good reason for it to be termed an emergency and to be used as the reason for calling it as such.
Right. Now, in terms of an emergency, how much time must members be given that
Well-
we are going to have an emergency sitting of the House?
Well, if I may read that particular section where we have meetings of the House. This is under the standing orders of the House, section 3, part 3. It says not later than 7 days before the date of a meeting, well, the clerk shall give notice. And then it goes down further to say, provided that in the case of any emergency of which the Speaker shall be the sole judge, a meeting of the National Assembly may be summoned on such shorter notice as he or she may determine, and such notice may be given to members by such means as the urgency of the case permits. So,
Yeah, one of the arguments made, of course, by the members of the House then is that the Parliament had started and they had not received any notice.
well, clearly that's a violation. That to me, that's a violation, even in the case of emergency, because this section says the Speaker, yes, you can call a House at short notice, or shorter than the 7 days, or whatever period. It's silent on the how short could be. But the point is, you must give some kind of notice, and so to me, back then, that clearly was a
Okay.
violation.
Right. Now, of course, any government, the term of a government or the maximum term of any government is 5 years. Now, in today's world, we are seeing all kinds of things. We are seeing sometimes people going to the polls 3 times, 4 times in 5 years and so on. Just let us look at the UK. You know how many prime ministers they would have had within one term. And so on. You had David Cameron, and then you had Theresa May, and you had Boris Johnson. 3 prime ministers within a 5-year term. So, within a 5-year term, an election can be called at any time, and the Governor General may at any time as well prorogue that word or to dissolve the Parliament. But if the government goes on, normally, in its 5-year term, when does the House have to be prorogued or dissolved, according to the Constitution?
Let's speak to our
Constitution.
our constitution and our existing situation. We put it in time frame. We had elections February 2015. The House first met in May 2015, 3 months after the election. Right?
Right, and that is also by Constitution.
By Constitution.
That
Well,
the House has to meet
within
90 days, within 90 days
of the election.
After
Yes,
within,
okay.
yes.
And once the House would have had that first meeting, there is when the actual 5 years begin,
Yes.
Once
okay.
the House first sits, not the date of the election.
Right, so it is
So-
5 years after the first sitting of the
sitting.
National Assembly.
Yeah, the House must be dissolved
5 years.
Yes,
after within 5
5
years of the
years.
first sitting.
of the first sitting.
So when the first sitting comes around, which would be on what? What
It
was
would
the
be
first sitting?
Mid-May of 2015, yes.
Mid-May of 2015. Then the House cannot go past that date. It has to
This
be
year. Yeah,
That's what I
yes.
mean. It has to be.
2015.
It has to be dissolved by then.
By mid-May, let me say mid-May, I think it's May 15th this year. And once it's dissolved, you still have another 90 days by which an election must be held.
So that can take you up to August.
Yeah, that's where the mid-August date comes into play from from my understanding of the Constitution, and yeah, you do have up until
Right,
mid-August.
and for the House to be dissolved, it is the Prime Minister who has to. The Governor General will act in terms
On
of
the
dissolving
advice,
the House on
yes.
the advice of the Prime Minister.
Yes.
Okay.
Prime Minister has the call. He's the only person who has that call.
What does it actually mean when the House is dissolved? During the normal session of the House and so on, you have members of Parliament and all of that sort of a thing, and the Parliament makes laws and all of this. What does it mean when the House is prorogued?
Well, the simplest way of putting it, once it's dissolved, the House cannot meet again. It cannot meet, so then if it cannot meet, then no parliamentary matters can be dealt with. No laws can be passed. It stops.
So
Only-
in this case, in this case, we do not have lawmakers.
That's correct in my view. That's correct because no one can pass any law if the parliament is not in session, if it's dissolved.
We still have a prime
But
minister.
of course, but I was about to say the ministers continue to function as ministers, but not as members of parliament because the house is dissolved.
On election day, is the prime minister the prime minister?
My advice is the prime minister until the next one is appointed. And that's my understanding, subject to correction, but
Okay.
there must be a prime minister at all times. So
Right. Now, I've often heard you in the parliament speak about or given some sort of a ruling in terms of the names of judges and magistrates and the deputy, the DPP.
DPP.
And the registrar and so on and all of that sort of a thing. Oftentimes when those names are called in the parliament is when you are very stern. Why is that so?
It has its own history, as to what brought me to the point where I made a ruling, a very specific ruling, that unless a member brings a substantive motion to the House to deal with any judge or magistrate or the director of public prosecution or the register of the High Court, unless that person in the official capacity is brought up in the debate unless it's done through a substantive motion, I would not tolerate these persons and their offices being brought into the debate of the House. Our standing orders speak specifically to judges, but then again, using my discretion, the discretionary authority which I have, you have to analyze things. You have to understand what is being said and why it's being said. And I felt very uncomfortable. I find we were going on a dangerous path of questioning members, such high-ranking members of the judiciary. Now, the judiciary, that's like the backbone of our
We have
good
separation
government.
of powers.
Yes, we do. And so you I simply could no longer allow members to be, in a way, accusing these persons of wrongdoing or questioning their conduct. And so there's a ruling now which says members would not be allowed to bring up the names of judges, magistrates, the DPP, Register of the High Court in the debates unless it's through a substantive motion.
Right. Now, Speaker, recently there was it emerged, let me put it that way, it emerged out of London, Gatwick International Airport in London, that the leader of the opposition was pulled over, let me use that word, with a stash of money, cash. And there was also an article in the Daily Mail, written by a Harry Cole, who is editor of the Sunday Mail, claiming that the former Prime Minister was questioned at Gatwick International Airport on his way to United Arab Emirates, to Dubai, having in his possession, I think it was 70,000, or what the equivalent of 70,000 pounds. That has come up in the Parliament. And you have, in a sense, not really wanting to deal with it. Why?
Well, it's one of those very interesting situations which could have very far-reaching consequences if proven correct, or if, say, charges are brought out of the incident and the
The
particular...
leader denied
Yes.
it,
Yes.
and he categorically denied it, saying that it is not true, even to the point of saying that the cash and you know what was in possession and so on, even to the fact, can that which he said in the parliament be used in a court of law? His categorical denial.
Okay, I don't think so, based on how our constitution speak to matters like this, that nothing that is said in parliament can be brought up in a court of law. The constitution specifically speaks to that. But in parliament, the way I dealt with it was a very simple approach, if I may say, in that the matter was brought up by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who spoke to the incident in very specific detail and named the honorable leader of the opposition as the member concerned with this matter. So again, so there you have it. The Minister of Foreign Affairs speaks in a very specific and concise way about a particular
Yes.
incident. Yes, the leader of the opposition has denied it, or denied that the incident took place. But as speaker, because the information has been disseminated in parliament by a minister of government, and when I questioned the minister, he said yes, the information has come to the government of the day. I'm in no position to dispute what the minister is saying, and so the onus really is on the member, or the accused, or the member concerned. He has a right to deny it, but then he would probably should go a bit further and provide some evidence to refute what is being said, what is being alleged.
Would the foreign minister, for example, even if he's the foreign minister, is his word as good as gold, or does he have to produce documents, some evidence to you that this came to the government from the UK?
Well, again, we have to understand the way Parliament works and Parliament function. You have ministers who would have taken oath to speak the truth and to, that's why they're called honorable. And so what I would say to that is, if the Minister of Foreign Affairs is proven to have said something incorrect or untruthful with respect to this matter, then the minister has a problem, the government has a problem. And so that would play out in time, and that is why my position is, in the meantime, I have to accept the word of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who said to the House he got the information, the government got the information from the authorities, and that there's an investigation on the way. So time will tell. Time will tell. You know.
Speaker, we have to go to the phone lines and see. We have a few callers. The overseas number to call is 1718-577-2916. That is 1718-577-2916. And the local number is 465-2555. The lines are open up until 3 o'clock. We await your calls. We have a caller. Working for you, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Williams.
Good afternoon, sir.
And good afternoon, Mr. Perkins.
Good afternoon.
Now, Mr. Perkins, in the past, when I listened to Parliament, it was a disgrace for we, the citizens of this country, the way how the farmer speaker operate. You understand? Because it seemed to me like the farmer speaker ain't have no say. Is the Prime Minister was the one at the time was controlling whatever. Because I remember a time with Mr. Eugene Hamilton, I think what the same boundary thing. What the boundary thing the land for the swap. When I think that the farmer lead must take Eugene Hamilton out like a criminal out the house. And to be truthful, I see some improvement in you with the part. You give everyone a fair chance. Even for the crosstalk. Even with the crosstalk, you give the opposition a fair chance to get the crosstalk. You appeal to them, tell them that they shouldn't do it. They continue doing it. The government says you do the same thing. Even with the Prime Minister. I hear shut up the Prime Minister. And this is what we want going forward. Not because you is the Prime Minister and you are the Speaker. I believe you are the Speaker of the House and you're supposed to have the most say in the House. You rule over the House when it comes to Parliament. And I believe that in the future you can improve more and you work. Because you're doing a good job, to be truthful. You letting every man got a fair share of saying what they want to say, especially in the cross thing.
Okay.
You have a wonderful day. God bless.
Okay, thank you for your call. Okay, we have no caller, speaker. So, you know, we've dealt with that. Working for you, good afternoon.
Good day. I'd like to get on the program.
Yes, you're on the program. You are on the program.
Oh, I'm live?
Yes, you are. Good afternoon.
Okay, good afternoon. I found it interesting that the speaker did not, in his opening statement, define exactly what he thought his role would be in respect to fairness and impartiality. I think it was you, presenter, who actually raised these issues. And bearing in mind that, as Speaker says, government already have an advantage, shouldn't the Speaker see his role as there to protect the minority opposition from the machinations of the majority in the House? Mention was made, for instance, of the machinations of February 2015. But what about the machinations of December 2018, I think it was, when Mr. Brantley used the technicality to shut down the debate on a motion of no confidence then? Right? In the interest of democracy, shouldn't all the voices of the members be heard? And, you know, I think mention was made for perception out there that the Speaker does not seem to be fair. I'm interested in knowing whether or not the Speaker sees himself as facilitating the executive agenda, so to speak. Has there been any instances when the Speaker finds himself collaborating with the executive to make sure that the agenda in Parliament succeeds? And is that an appropriate role for the Speaker? And finally, you know, I find, personally, I listen to some of the proceedings, and I find that the Prime Minister in particular is allowed to abuse parliamentary privileges. Okay? You know, for campaign purposes and for calling people's names who are not there to defend themselves, those kinds of things. And to me, the Speaker does not intervene in those instances. You know, it should be, to me, it should be across the board. And this latest, I know for sure that the Speaker likes to say, show me the documentation. You always ask that, especially your opposition. Okay? And I think the same should have been done in the case, this last case where Mr. Brandt spoke about the Gatwick. That should be done too. Because there are other instances where members of Parliament have been caught with doing questionable acts, and they're not allowed in Parliament.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, caller. Thank you for your call. Working for you, good afternoon.
That's right.
Yes, good afternoon.
Happy New Year.
The very same to you.
Thank you. And Happy New Year, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, sir. Same to you.
Yeah, you're doing good. And the program is very educational, as usual. Now, I'm going to ask you a question and then I'll make a comment. Is any member in the Parliament has the right to raise their voice higher than the Speaker when the Speaker said order? And then arguing with the Speaker, want to tell the Speaker what to do? That's the question. But here my comment now to the last caller. He is unfair. Mr. Troffman, you are unfair. You accuse the Prime Minister that the Prime Minister wants to do as he like in the House. Mr. Troffman, you forget under the farm administration, when the then Speaker of the House, when he make a decision, Dr. Douglas, the leader of the Parliament, of the opposition, tell the Speaker, I can deal with you. I can deal with you. He was out of place on order. Mr. Troffman, why you don't talk about that? You're always coming on accusing people of wrong things, and the wrong things right under your nose, and you ain't talking about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your call. Working for you, good afternoon. We'll take this call and then we'll allow the speaker some time to answer. Working for you, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Williams.
Good afternoon, sir.
Happy New Year to you.
The very same to you.
Good afternoon to the speaker.
Good afternoon.
Happy New Year to you.
Thank you. You too.
What I want to say here, right? I'm a citizen of the Federation of St. Neighbors. I do not call in because I want to call in. When there's a concern in my federation, I have a right to call in and say what is what. Coming back to the thing that call the meeting, right? Do you know this speaker then with Mr. Curtis Matt, his father was a crown police officer in the police force and also used to carry the mail almost for 25 years. And when I told him that his son didn't help me, he's glad and he's confident and he's going to do a job. But I have to respect him. He speaks up the house and I have to respect the speaker in the house of whatever it is. But him as though he was not respected by the then Prime Minister with Dr. Douglas, and he was used by other members in the House. And I think you're doing a wonderful job. Keep it up. Even though they are getting out of hand sometimes, you let them get in a little pipe play, and most likely we are getting things done. And all I do wish you all very best for 2020, and that country move on. Have a good day.
Okay, thank you, sir. Speaker, an
Well-
opportunity for you to respond to what you would like to respond to.
Yeah, well, just very quickly, one caller said I didn't speak to my role, and that was to the effect that I'm not being fair or biased. But I addressed that. I've stated earlier, and I've always said that I try my best to be as fair as possible in my role as speaker. I have had the opportunity to speak to members on both sides. I asked them to retract. You know, I'm not sure what he speaks to the in terms of.
Well, let's put
you know.
it this way, Speaker. You will always be criticized.
Accept.
In a role like that, and that is the easiest criticism to make, that you're not being fair. I used to look at I still do, the UK Parliament, and the last Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir John Bercow, he was accused of being unfair and being biased. So, in a role like what you have, that will be an accusation.
And one other area I'll make a quick comment on that a caller alluded to was this issue to do with members of the names of persons in the public being mentioned or being called. That is something I've been asked about, approached on. The truth of the matter is there's nothing in the rules that says the public or the names of members of the public cannot be brought up in a debate. And what I am always careful of or cognizant of is, okay, any references being made to anyone in the public, it must have had something to do with the conduct of their doing business with government, and probably would have received taxpayers' money. And so clearly, members of the public, we as citizens, part of our duty is to, once we conduct business with government, we too have an obligation to ensure that it is above board, it is transparent, it can withstand scrutiny. And that is what Parliament is all about. To scrutinize the activities of government, to scrutinize contracts between one government and a member. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Having said that, I have had complaints from members of the public to do with things that were said by a member in the House, and I've dealt with those complaints. So I'm always open to, if anyone feel aggrieved by anything that is said in the House by a member, sure, they can communicate their grievance to me, and I deal with it in Parliament. I actually, at times, read out the letters that are written and give a member to respond.
Yeah, there have been a lot of complaints from the opposition about these, what they call these lengthy statements by ministers in the House. What is your position on that?
I've heard that, and I've said before, and I'll say again, that position is baseless. It has no merit, because statements by ministers is an item on the order paper. It's part of the sittings of the House. Any member, any minister rather, who wishes to make a statement to do with his portfolios, he can make that statement. The Speaker has no authority to not allow him. The Speaker has no authority to curtail his presentation, because there's nothing in the rule that says how long such a presentation should be. And there's one of the criticisms I've heard also is that in other jurisdictions and other legislatures, the statements are maybe a few minutes long. But again, I cannot give unto myself that authority to tell a minister that you can only speak for this amount. I do not have that authority. I'll be in breach of the very rules if I'm to do that.
Okay.
So until we change those rules or address that particular of length of speeches by members, we have
course,
to,
Speaker, what the argument is, that the speakers, that the ministers are speaking for so long that it is cutting out the time that the opposition members have to speak.
But
that have been
But no,
part
that
of the
is not
argument.
a valid. That is not a valid argument either. Meaning, any except for statement by ministers and personal explanations and so on. When it comes to the bills, the members have equal time, an hour in some cases, and an hour and a half. Each of them has that amount of time. So the complaint really is specific to the statements by ministers. And like I said, to me, it is not a complaint with merit, because there's nothing the Speaker can do about that.
Now, we have to wrap up now. Speaker
Time
Perkins.
has flown
Yeah,
very quickly. Yes,
time
yes.
is not on our side at this point. But your term as Speaker comes to an end with the dissolution of Parliament in a few months' time. And then, whichever government is elected, or whichever government takes power, in the next term, they would have to appoint another Speaker a speaker, let me put it that way.
The speaker would have to be elected
Elected.
by the members of the House.
Elected by the
Of
House.
the new House, yeah.
And then the appointment. What would you say would have been one of your greatest challenges? And what would you say have been one of your greatest joys as serving as Speaker of the National Assembly?
Well, once I would have gotten the appointment subsequent to the election to the speakership by the House, I think I set out on a path of trying to make the proceedings of Parliament more understandable by the public, because I found that in the past the Parliament seemed to be this institution out this apart, separate and apart from the people, and you know, the common man in the street wasn't too interested and so on. So at every step of the way I've tried my best to educate, and I tend to repeat a lot of things in Parliament so that the younger ones and the nation on a whole would understand more of what's going on in Parliament. I hope, and I've seen some evidence of that has been a success, because people approach me all the time and said to me, you know, I'm really understanding a lot more, and I didn't know this, now I know that. And so to me that's some gratification that I believe Parliament is now, the workings of Parliament is now more understandable to the general public at large. In terms of my, I think you asked me about my disappointment.
Your challenges.
Or challenges.
Or disappointments, if you think that they are.
I'll speak more to our disappointment rather than a challenge, because I've enjoyed the challenge. Let me put it like that. The
Okay.
challenges that I am facing.
And there will always be
yes,
challenges.
I find it as a motivation. I'm always one who tend to take on challenges. But the disappointment has been the lack of respect at times I get from certain members in the House. Because I sat on the opposition benches for 10 years, let me say that here now, on the different speakers, and I do not recall some of the disrespect shown to me. I cannot think of an instant where a member would be so embrazen to directly disrespect the speaker by what he says and the way his behavior. That to me it's been a disappointment. But having said that, I believe I have seen some improvement with respect to that, and I believe that the general membership of the House is far more respectful of the position of the speakership. And I'm not talking about me as a person, but as of the speakership of the House. But I have to date, despite the challenges, despite the heated debate at time, I have enjoyed my stint, and I look forward to seeing out this particular term, whether it's in 3 months or 6 months, as you say.
Speaker
Thank you.
Perkins, it has been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Thank
You have been listening to another edition of Working for You. I want to thank all of our callers and our listeners to today's program. Next week we will be back for another edition of Working for You. Until then, I am Les Roy Williams.
Working for you. A weekly talk radio program which highlights developments of national interest and the activities of your St. Kitts Nevis government. Join host Les Roy Williams as he presents news, views, reports, and interviews about everything regarding the activities of the Team Unity government and the building of our communities and the development of St. Kitts Nevis. Tune in and call in to interact with your government and share your views regarding the upward forward development of your community and our beautiful Twin Island Federation. Working for You is weekly, every Wednesday live from 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m. on ZIZ Radio, Win FM, and Sugar City FM with rebroadcast on participating stations. Working for You.